The first sound was so faint, I thought I imagined it, a soft, breathy cry, curling through the hallway like steam from a kettle. I sat up, straining to hear my old bones creaking in protest from a sleep that hadn't been deep to begin with. And then again a little wail, fragile and searching, coming from the nursery down the hall. I glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. I waited a moment longer, thinking surely her parents would hear. The monitor must have been on in their room, and surely a mother knows her child's cry. But the house stayed still. No footsteps, no door creaks, just silence. And that lonely little cry threading through it. I slipped out of bed and into my old slippers. They've got a tear on the left toe, and the sole is almost smooth from years of quiet shuffling. My robe was draped over the chair, and I wrapped it tight as I made my way down the hall, pressing my hand gently against the wall for balance. My knees don't work like they used to, not since the second fall, but I'd walk barefoot across broken glass if that baby needed me. I opened the nursery door slowly, careful not to startle her. The soft hum of the white noise machine filled the room, but she was sitting up in her crib, little fists rubbing at her eyes, cheeks damp and flushed. Her tiny lips trembled as she reached out. No words, just need. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered, lifting her against my chest. Her head dropped onto my shoulder like a sigh, warm and trusting. And for a moment the ache in my lower back disappeared, replaced by something tender and sacred. I sat in the old rocking chair by the window, a hand-me-down, from when her father was an infant. I had saved it all these years, refinished it myself, cushioned it, with layers of faded fabric. It groaned beneath my weight, but held us both. I rocked slowly, humming a lullaby. I hadn't sung since my son had chickenpox in 1988. Her breath slowed. Her fingers curled around the fabric of my robe. The world outside was wrapped in hush. No traffic, no dogs barking, no television, no phones. Just me and her, and the tick of the old hallway clock beating like a heart in another room. I stayed there for nearly 2 hours. Her fever broke sometime around 4. Her breathing deepened. I shifted her gently back into the crib, tucking the blanket under her arms, the way I used to do with her father. And just as I turned to go, I caught sight of something, a framed photo on the dresser. Her parents smiling. Her in between them. No trace of me. I didn't cry. I just stood there looking at it, feeling like I was floating somewhere outside that frame. I had been there that day at the park, where that photo was taken. I was the one who wiped her face after she fell in the mulch, who packed the extra snacks, who held the dog on the leash so they could take that picture. And still erased. Not intentionally, maybe, but it hurt just the same. I shuffled back to my room and closed the door softly behind me. My slippers sat beside the bed, like obedient little sentinels. I slipped them off and climbed back beneath the cold sheets. My body ached in every joint, but my heart more than anything. And still I told myself it was worth it. That she had needed me. That I had done something good. But the morning came, and no one mentioned it. Not a word. No thank you. No. Did she sleep okay? Not even a passing glance in my direction. I watched as her mother scrolled through her phone over coffee, and her father muttered something about a meeting running late. And the baby, well, she smiled when she saw me at least. That was something. I was halfway through folding a blanket when her mother said almost offhandedly, "We're trying to get her to self-soothe, you know. If she cries sometimes, it's best to let her work it out." I looked up the words, catching me mid-fold. I wanted to say that she had a fever, that she needed comfort, not independence, that I wasn't undermining anyone, I was just being a grandmother. But the words caught in my throat, heavy with years and dust, and things I'd learned not to say. So I nodded instead, said nothing, let the blanket fall neatly into its square, warm from the night, but empty now, just like me. I don't know if anyone else remembers that night the way I do. Maybe to them, it was just another morning, another diaper change, another cup of lukewarm coffee, reheated 3 times. But to me it lingered. That baby's fevered breath on my neck, the way her tiny fingers dug into the fabric of my robe, like she was anchoring herself to the world. I couldn't forget it, even if they had. Later that same day, I was in the kitchen rinsing out bottles. My fingers aren't as quick as they once were, but I've done this so many times my hands remember the rhythm better than my mind does. Pop the nipple off rinse, shake place on the towel. I was humming to myself something tuneless and soft, the way I do when I don't want to feel invisible. And then she came in, my daughter-in-law, with a look on her face that tried to be polite, but couldn't hide the edge beneath. I already washed those, she said, not unkindly but not kindly either. I blinked, holding a bottle halfway under the faucet. Oh, I wasn't sure, I murmured. Just figured I'd help. She smiled tight and short. Of course. It's just, we have a system now. Makes it easier if we keep things the same. I nodded, but the words landed like tiny stones. A system. Easier. Without me. I looked down at the bottle in my hand. It was spotless, maybe cleaner than it had been before. But suddenly it felt like I was holding something I shouldn't have touched. I went to the living room and sat down on the edge of the couch. The TV was on, but muted cartoons flickering across the screen. My granddaughter toddled across the rug, her little legs still wobbly, her curls bouncing with each step. She came to me, plopped a toy into my lap and said, "Up," I smiled, and scooped her up, my arms aching already, but my heart lifting. We played for a few minutes, just stacking blocks and knocking them down again, her laughter ringing out every time the tower toppled. I forgot the kitchen. I forgot the bottle. I forgot that I wasn't part of the system. And then her father walked in. "Hey," he said a little sharp. Did she already have her snack? I looked up surprised. She didn't want any yet. Just playing for now. He frowned. We're trying to keep her on a schedule. His voice wasn't angry exactly, but it was something else. Irritated. Tired. Guarded. I don't know. But suddenly I felt small. Like I'd overstepped again. I opened my mouth to explain, to say that she hadn't even asked for food, that we'd just been playing, that I didn't mean to interfere. But I saw his eyes flick to the clock, and I knew he wasn't listening. She was still laughing, reaching for the blocks, unbothered, happy. But I placed her gently back on the floor anyway, giving her a pat on the back and saying, "Time for snacks, sweetheart." I stood up slowly, the familiar pain shooting up my spine. And as I walked back to my room, I passed by a mirror in the hallway. I stopped, looked. The face staring back at me was mine, but older than I remembered. Eyes tired, shoulders bent. My robe sagged at the collar, the hem brushing the tops of my slippers. And I thought, when did I become someone who needed to be managed? When did my presence stop feeling like help and start feeling like intrusion? I used to be the one who set the schedules, who decided when snacks were given, who washed bottles without anyone questioning it. I used to be the one who taught them what care even looked like. And now I was being told gently but firmly that my way was outdated, disruptive, unnecessary. Back in my room, I sat down on the edge of the bed and picked up my knitting. The yarn felt rougher than usual. Or maybe my fingers just weren't as forgiving. I sat there looping and looping, trying to knit the feeling away, but it clung to me. That dull ache of being useful but not wanted, needed but not welcomed. Always one step out of sync with the life I'd once nurtured into existence. I thought of that moment in the nursery the night before, the way her little body curled into mine without hesitation. That was real. That was true. Children don't lie about love. And yet, even that felt temporary now, like I was allowed to matter only in the shadows, only when the system faltered, only when the crying was too inconvenient for anyone else. The day went on. Meals were eaten, diapers were changed, nap times came and went, and through it all I stayed quiet. Careful, present, but small, like a ghost in a house I once built. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen. The lights were dimmed, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I looked at the baby monitor left on the counter. Her soft breathing filled the speaker. And I whispered I was here, even if they forget I was here. There was a time when she reached for me like I was the moon, arms outstretched, face lit with recognition, the way only a child can truly believe someone is both comfort and magic. I remember one morning, she must have been just over a year old, I came into the living room with her favorite blanket draped over my arm. She spotted me, her pacifier hanging loosely from her mouth, and her whole body lunged forward, leaving her mother's arms behind without a second thought. Mama, she'd called out, not her mother, me. Everyone laughed it off, of course. She just mixes us up, her father said, sipping his coffee. Her mother chuckled, but something in her face tensed, just slightly. I saw it. That flicker of something, possessiveness maybe, or guilt, or just the sting of being second in a moment that was supposed to be yours. She'll grow out of that, her mother added, as if she needed the words to reassure herself. But deep down I knew what that moment meant. I knew it because I had lived it before with my own children, and with my mother before me. Now, though things are different. She's older, not by much, barely 3, but enough for the tides to shift. Now when I come into the room, she looks to her mother first, stays where she is, sometimes even hides slipping behind legs, or pressing her face into her mother's shoulder, not out of fear, not because she doesn't know me, but because something subtle, quiet, and consistent has been taught to her. I see it in the way her mother gently says, "Go say hi to Grandma," like it's a polite obligation. Not joy, not instinct, just manners. And that's what I've become, I think. A polite gesture. One afternoon, she was playing in the yard with her father. I stood on the porch watching from a distance, holding a sweater in case the breeze picked up. She tripped on a sprinkler head and fell to the grass, just a little scrape, nothing serious. Still, I started to step down the stairs, instinct leading the way. But her father was faster. He scooped her up before I reached the 3rd step and said, "You're okay, baby, Daddy's got you." I stopped, stood there with the sweater in my arms like an extra just off stage. And then I heard it, her voice muffled in his shoulder. "Not Grandma," she said. "No Grandma. Daddy." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even conscious, just words, just a child being clear about what she wanted. But those 3 words sliced through me like paper cuts, across old skin sharp, surprising and too small for anyone else to notice the bleeding. I smiled. I nodded. I turned back toward the door, sweater still folded and warm. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, brushing my hair in the dim light of a lamp, with a bulb that buzzed faintly. I thought about all the nights I had carried her, all the times I'd hummed her to sleep, all the meals I'd prepared, when her parents were too tired or too distracted. I thought about the soft way she once laid her cheek against my chest, how her tiny hands used to pat my shoulder, like she was trying to comfort me. Where did all that go? I'm not naive. I know children change. I know their worlds are small and fluid, and governed by whoever is nearest and loudest and most constant. But this didn't feel like change. It felt like erasure. like someone was painting over the parts of the picture that included me. It's hard to say this without sounding ungrateful. That's what they'd probably think if I ever dared voice it. "You're taking it too personally," they'd say. "She's just a kid." And I'd nod because I know how to nod. I've had decades of practice. But inside, it feels like being uninvited from your own story. The next morning, she came into the kitchen while I was making tea. She toddled in, dragging a toy elephant behind her. I bent down and said her name with a soft smile, opening my arms. She looked at me wide-eyed and silent, and then turned back toward the hallway. "Mommy," she called. I stayed crouched there for a few seconds longer than I should have, my knees beginning to tremble, the warmth of the tea kettle behind me starting to fade. And when I finally stood up, it felt like standing alone in a room full of echoes. That day, I said very little. I kept to myself. I folded the laundry without offering to put it away. I watched her play from behind the glass door instead of stepping outside. I told myself it was okay, that this was just how things shift, how generations pass, how new roles are carved out of old ones, whether we want them or not. But later, when I was brushing her hair and she didn't pull away, when she leaned her head back into my hand and let me finish without a single protest, I almost cried. Not because it fixed everything, but because for a moment I wasn't forgotten. I was still someone whose touch was remembered. Even if they don't see it, she does somewhere in there. And that, I told myself, would have to be enough. We were sitting around the dining table one morning, the smell of toast and marmalade still warm in the air when it happened. Just a small moment, barely a breath, in the flow of the day, but it settled into my bones like frost. I had offered her a little shortbread cookie, one of the ones I keep tucked away in the tin with the blue lid, the kind I used to give her father after school when his cheeks were red from running and his backpack full of crumpled papers. I held it out to her the same way I did with him on a napkin not too close, like an invitation instead of a demand. She reached for it, eyes lit up, and I smiled. But before she could take it, her mother's voice cut in just a little too loud, just a little too sharp. No, not before lunch. We talked about this. The little hand froze midair. Her eyes flicked between us, and then she slowly pulled her fingers back, curling them into a fist against her chest, like she'd done something wrong. I opened my mouth to explain that it was just a small treat, that lunch was hours away, that it was tradition, almost. But her mother was already cleaning up the breakfast plates as if the conversation had ended before it had begun. I didn't realize I said softly, folding the napkin back over the cookie. "It's okay," she replied, not looking at me. "We're just trying to stick to healthier routines." The word we hung in the air, heavy, exclusive, final. I set the cookie aside and watched as my granddaughter climbed into her booster seat and started coloring with a broken crayon. She didn't seem upset. Not really. But there was a silence between us now, new, strange, and small enough that only I could feel it. Later, when we were alone, I tried again. I offered to make her a little fruit plate, slice the apples the way she liked, skin peeled, edges rounded so they wouldn't sting her gums. She nodded, and for a moment it felt normal, like we were just ourselves again. But as I handed her the plate, she said something that stopped me cold. "Is Mommy gonna be mad?" I paused, kneeling there on the kitchen tile, apple in hand, eyes suddenly stinging. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "Mommy's not mad, I promise." But inside I wasn't sure. Not about her mother, not about myself, and not about where I fit anymore in a house where even cookies were now too much. That evening they were talking about sleep routines over dinner, something they'd read online, some new parenting blog or study. Consistency is key, her mother said, and her father nodded as if the words were gospel. I sat quietly chewing my food slowly, thinking of all the nights I'd rocked that child to sleep during thunderstorms, when she couldn't breathe through her nose, when her gums ached from molars trying to break through. My consistency had been soft songs, warm bottles, stories about clouds that turned into ships. Their consistency was charts, schedules, apps. There was a moment when she got fussy, and without thinking, I reached for her, offering my arms the way I always had. But her mother intervened. "Let her work through it," she said, lifting the child instead and pacing the living room in circles I used to walk. I pulled my hands back to my lap, folded them, looked down at the napkin that once held a cookie. No one said I did anything wrong. No one scolded me directly. But it was in the tone, the glances, the coolness. I was being edged out gently, quietly, like a favorite chair moved into storage when new furniture arrives. Still loved, perhaps, but no longer needed in the living room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window in my room, the same rocking chair beneath me that had cradled 3 generations of babies in their first storms. My fingers traced the worn wooden armrest, remembering the rhythm of lullabies, and midnight tears wiped away on robe sleeves. And I thought, what does it mean to care too much? Is that what I'm doing? Is love supposed to come with disclaimers now, with scheduled visits and pre-approved snack lists? All I ever wanted was to help, to ease their burden, to be what I had once been, the soft place to land. But now even softness is too much. I looked out at the moon, quiet and full. It reminded me of her face that night, pressed against my chest, burning with fever and trust. She hadn't thought I was too much. She had only wanted to be held. And I had held her. Even if no one remembered, even if it wasn't part of their system, I had held her. It was the diaper bag that broke me. Something so small, so ordinary, so utterly ridiculous in the grand scale of things. But that's how it always happens, doesn't it? The little things. The paper cuts, not the knives. The quiet sighs, not the screams. They stack up until your heart feels like it's been left out in the rain too long, soft at the edges, fragile at the seams. They were getting ready for an outing, a little trip to the park, nothing big. I was in the hallway folding a blanket when her mother called from the kitchen. "Can you pack the diaper bag? The bottles are on the counter." I smiled. Of course I could. I used to do this with my eyes closed in the dark with one hand while burping a baby with the other. It felt good to be asked. It felt like being trusted again. I moved with quiet purpose, humming under my breath. A bottle, a change of clothes, 2 diapers, wipes, her favorite pacifier with the yellow handle, a small container of those star-shaped snacks she loves. I even tucked in a hat in case it got chilly. When I handed it off, she took it without looking. But then a minute later, her voice floated from the other room. "Did you put in sunscreen?" I paused. "No, I didn't think you'd be out that long." "We always pack sunscreen," she cut in sharp now. "It's part of the routine." I tried to smile, to nod. "I'll grab it." But it was too late. She'd already taken the bag, unzipped it, and began unpacking everything. "Where's the teether?" she muttered. "We always bring the teether." My hand stayed still at my sides. I watched as she pulled out the contents piece by piece, reshuffling, discarding, rearranging, as if I had stuffed it with pebbles and old receipts instead of care. "I'll just do it," she said. And it wasn't angry, it was worse. It was dismissive. I stood there like furniture, then turned and walked quietly back down the hall. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, that aching, familiar place, and tried not to cry. I wasn't sad because I'd forgotten sunscreen. I was sad because I remembered so much else. The fever that night, the tiny fingernails digging into my shoulder, the rocking chair, the cookie on the napkin, the first time she said "Mama" and meant me. All of it unseen, erased by a teether and a bottle of Coppertone. I didn't go to the park that day. They didn't invite me. I heard them leave the front door swinging open with cheerful voices and keys jingling. I watched them from the window. My granddaughter in the stroller, her mother adjusting the strap, her father checking his phone, and me upstairs forgotten. I used to be the first one they called. When she had colic, when she wouldn't nap, when her mother was too tired to lift her own arms, I stayed through every storm, every mess, every late-night grocery run. I washed clothes. I scrubbed bottles. I caught vomit in my hands. But now I packed the bag wrong, so I was replaced. I made a cup of tea, poured it into the floral china I always use when I'm trying not to fall apart, sat in silence. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, I remembered something my mother once said to me. I had just scolded her years ago for giving my son too much sugar. I'd said it flippantly the way young mothers do when they believe they've discovered a better way. She had smiled gently, but her eyes dimmed. "You'll understand one day," she'd said. "It's not about the sugar." And now I do. It's about being sidelined, being seen as the one who doesn't know, even though you're the one who taught them everything they know. It's about your wisdom being passed over for a blog post, your love being measured in ounces and routines and checklists you never got to read. They came home later, all sun-flushed and buzzing with energy. I smiled from the top of the stairs, even as something inside me cracked a little more. My granddaughter saw me and waved a chubby hand. "Hi, Grandma," she called, voice bright. I waved back. "Did you have fun?" She nodded. I swinged. "That's wonderful," I said. "I missed you." Her mother looked up, met my eyes, and gave me a small, almost guilty smile. "Sorry we rushed out." She was cranky. We didn't want to lose the window. I nodded. Of course, no problem. But it was a problem. Not for them. For me. I'd never had to ask for windows before. I'd been the window, the door, the house itself. And now I was just the wind brushing softly against it, present, but no longer welcomed in. She took her first steps in my arms. Not in front of a crowd, not with a phone recording, not with a squeal of orchestrated excitement posted for likes. Just the two of us, in the quiet of the living room, while the sun painted long shadows across the rug. It had been a long afternoon. Her parents were upstairs on a call, something about work or life, or one of those endless meetings they always emerged from looking drained and distracted. I had taken her hands in mine, the way I always did, letting her lead me through her tiny, lopsided world. We played a game we'd invented together, step, pause, clap. Step, pause, clap. And then somewhere between two claps she let go. Her feet moved forward not far, maybe 3 wobbly steps, but they were hers, all hers. And then just as quickly she fell into my lap, giggling like the air itself had tickled her feet. I held her tight, kissed the top of her head, whispered, "You did it, little one," as tears welled in my eyes, tears I didn't know I had saved for that exact moment. I wanted to tell someone right away. It felt too big to keep inside. So when her parents came down, I stood in the doorway, waiting like a child eager to share her report card. "She walked," I said softly, "just a few steps toward me." They both looked up, blinking. Her mother smiled. "Oh, really? That's great." Her father glanced at the baby, who was now chewing on a stuffed giraffe. "Wish we'd seen it," he muttered half to himself. There was a pause. One of those strange, heavy silences that feels like walking into a room that used to be yours and finding the furniture gone. Then she said it. I hope you didn't push her. We're trying not to rush her development." I stood there, mouth slightly open. Pushed her. The child had floated into those steps like a feather on a breeze. No force, no pressure. Just a moment. A miracle. No, I said slowly. She did it on her own. Okay, her mother replied, already turning back to the dishes in the sink. Just checking. And that was that. No excitement, no camera, no family text thread, no date written down in a baby book. Just a shrug, a missed moment, a faint ripple that barely reached the shore. Later that evening, I sat alone with my tea while they uploaded a photo of her in a new outfit captioned, "Almost Walking," to a social feed, full of people who hadn't held her hand, hadn't caught her when she stumbled, hadn't felt her heart beating against their knees. I stared at the post for a long time. Almost walking. Almost. I could have said something. I could have corrected it, told the truth, claimed the memory that belonged to me, but I didn't. I closed the app, set the phone face down, looked out the window instead. Because I knew the truth, and so did she. Children remember differently than adults, not in words, not in tidy rows of memories, but in feelings, warmth, presence, lullabies hummed off-key, the shape of hands that held them, the scent of soap and wool and someone who stayed. I would be that memory. Maybe not in their stories, not in their journals, not in the bright square of a photo frame, but in her. In the way she smiles at the scent of chamomile, in the rhythm of the lullaby she hums to her doll, in the part of her soul that trusts the world to hold her softly. That would be mine. Still, it hurt. It hurt to sit in a house full of love and feel like a borrowed thing, like a chair no one sits in anymore, but no one wants to move. Useful once. Beloved maybe, but out of place now in a room with new decor. The next day they spoke about enrolling her in daycare. Just a few mornings a week, they said. Good for her social skills, good for her independence. I smiled, nodded, said it sounded wonderful. But I couldn't help but wonder, was this about her or was it about me? About making space? About separating the old rhythms from the new ones? That night when I tucked her in, she reached for my face with both hands, pressed her nose to mine. "Love you, Grandma," she whispered, almost like a secret. And for one breathless second, the world stopped. My hands shook as I pulled the blanket over her. I kissed her forehead. I turned out the light. That was the last time I would be the one to put her to bed. They didn't say I couldn't. They just stopped asking. And I stopped offering. I found out about the birthday party on Facebook. I was scrolling absent-mindedly the way I sometimes do in the late afternoon, when the house is too quiet and the clock ticks louder than it should. I don't post much. I never felt the need to catalog my life, but I check in, just to see what the world is doing without me. And there it was, a photo of her cheeks, painted with glitter, a balloon crown sitting slightly askew on her head, hands clasped around a slice of cake. Smiling, laughing, joy radiating from her in a way only children can manage. In the background, streamers' friends' cupcakes, tiny chairs arranged in a semicircle. Her birthday isn't for another few days, I thought at first. Surely this was something else. A school event, a neighbor's gathering, something I hadn't been told about yet. I stared at the photo, reading every comment, every heart emoji, every. She's growing up so fast, typed by people who had never rocked her through a fever or sung her to sleep with a sore throat. Then the captions gave it away. Our baby girl turns 3. Thank you to everyone who made today so special. Today. They had the party today, and I hadn't even known. I sat still for a long time, not angry, not even surprised if I'm honest, just hollow, like someone had opened a drawer in my chest and quietly emptied it out without telling me. I thought back to the year before, when I had made her a homemade doll stitched from a pattern I used when her father was small. Her fingers had curled around it instantly, She named it after herself, slept with it for months. I'd spent hours on that doll, choosing the right fabric, embroidering the eyes so they wouldn't be buttons choking hazard, I remembered. I was careful. This year I had already bought a small gift, a book with lift-the-flap pages and animals that made soft noises. I had wrapped it in tissue paper the night before, thinking I'd bring it over in a few days. But the party had already happened, without me. No invitation, no mention, not even a photo sent privately just for me, just so I could see her face before the streamers came down. I thought maybe they forgot. Maybe it was last minute. Maybe it wasn't really a party, just a few people, something informal. But the photos told the truth. There were decorations, a cake with her name, other children, even a performer in costume. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there letting the silence grow thick around me. I placed the wrapped book gently on the table, pressed the edges down where they had lifted slightly. It looked small now, insignificant, a leftover gesture from someone who no longer had a place on the calendar. Later that night, my son called, casual, chatty. He mentioned work, the weather, the dog chewing through another couch cushion. He never brought up the party, not once. I didn't ask. I couldn't bear to hear the explanation. It was last minute, or we figured it might be too loud for you, or worst of all, we didn't think you'd mind. I would have minded, but I would have smiled through it. I would have worn my best sweater, the one she likes to snuggle against, and brought the gift, and taken a seat near the back and clapped when she blew out her candles. I would have watched from the shadows just to be there. But there wasn't even a shadow to stand in this time. The next day when I saw her, she ran to me as if nothing had happened. Arms wide, voice loud, hair still glittered with yesterday's magic. I got cake, she said. It was pink. That sounds lovely, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to hug her, breathing her in like a last page. And I realized then she didn't know. She didn't know I hadn't been there. Didn't know I'd been left out. Didn't know that while she was blowing out candles, I was folding laundry and watching the afternoon light fall through the curtains, like so many forgotten days. That made it both better and worse. Later, her mother thanked me for watching her for an hour so she could run errands. I nodded, took the compliment, held my tongue. No mention of yesterday, no flicker of apology, just a thank you, like you give a babysitter who doesn't expect to be paid. When they left, I sat on the couch and unwrapped the book I had brought, lifted each flap, touched each soft animal, closed it again and placed it on the shelf. Maybe she'd find it one day. Maybe she'd open it, trace her little fingers over the pages, and remember something. Not the party, not the glitter, not the cake, but the hands that had once held her so carefully, the arms that had never stopped being open, even when the door had been quietly closed. I wasn't trying to listen. Truly, I wasn't. It was one of those moments that just happens. You walk by a door that's slightly ajar, voices spill out, and before your brain can register that it's private, your heart has already heard enough. They were in the kitchen. I was headed to the laundry room, arms full of tiny clothes that still smelled like vanilla and baby lotion. The voices floated out in hushed tones, but not hushed enough. I know she means well, her mother said, and there was a pause, the kind of pause people take when they're trying to be polite about someone who isn't in the room. But sometimes she just gets in the way. I stopped, completely still. She was just trying to help with the bottles, my son replied. His voice sounded tight, tired. I know, she said, but she keeps undoing what we're trying to teach her. It's confusing. We finally got her to nap in the crib, and now she wants to be rocked again. Every time she's with your mom, it's like we have to start from scratch." The silence that followed was longer than the words that came before it. I stood there, frozen behind the corner wall sock hanging from my fingers, like a flag in surrender. "She's not doing it on purpose," he finally said. "I didn't say she was, I just—" Her voice softened. "I don't want to have to manage her, too. I'm already stretched thin." And there it was. Not anger, not cruelty, just weariness, that dangerous weariness that turns love into inconvenience, that makes kindness feel like a burden. I backed away before I could hear more, dropped the sock into the basket, and turned quietly into my room, where the ceiling fan hummed without comfort, and the window stayed closed against the spring air. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hands into my lap to stop the shaking. Gets in the way. That's what I had become. Not a pillar, not a helper, not a safety net. An interference. I looked at the pile of neatly folded clothes. Onesies, tiny pants with elastic waists, a bib with apples embroidered on it. I had washed them with the same care I used for my own children, hand-checking every button, laying them flat to dry. But now they felt foreign, like relics from a role that had quietly expired. That evening she sat on my lap, nestled against me, one hand clutching my thumb, the other twirling the edge of my sleeve. We rocked in silence. No songs, no stories, just the rhythm of a chair and a heart that didn't know where to go. Her mother passed by and gave a tight smile. "She'll never fall asleep on her own if you keep doing that," she said, as though she were commenting on the weather. I looked down at the child, her eyelashes already fluttering shut, her breath warm against my chest. I didn't say anything. I just kept rocking. Because I knew there wouldn't be many more times, that the window for this kind of closeness was closing. Not because she was growing too fast, but because I was being asked to step back, to let go, to stop being what I've always been. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the slow ways people leave you without ever moving out. How presence becomes silence. How once you're no longer needed, you become extra, and then eventually invisible. They never said I couldn't help. They never banned me from holding her. But their words, those little barbs tucked into pleasantries, were teaching me to stop showing up. It reminded me of the first time I let someone else hold my son longer than I wanted to, the ache in my arms, the forced smile, the knowledge that you can't cling too tightly even when every part of you is begging not to let go. Letting go is part of love. Everyone says that, but what they don't say is how much it takes from you each time you do. The next morning, I came down later than usual. The sun was already high. Breakfast half eaten, the baby was in her high chair, yogurt smeared across her cheeks. Her father was reading emails, her mother sipping coffee. "Morning," I said. They looked up surprised. "Sleepin'?" her mother asked. I nodded, something like that. I poured myself some tea, sat at the far end of the table, ate in silence. And when my granddaughter reached for me with sticky fingers, I smiled, but didn't move from my seat. I waited to be invited. But the invitation didn't come. The rocking chair is in the garage now. I found it tucked behind a stack of moving boxes, half covered with an old tarp, like it had been placed there, in a hurry, set aside, rather than stored with care. Dust clung to the edges. A spider had built a web across one of the armrests. I stood there staring at it for a long time, something tightening in my throat that I couldn't quite swallow. I didn't remember putting it there, and I certainly hadn't been told it would be moved. One day it was in the corner of the nursery beneath the soft glow of the moon-shaped lamp, and the next gone, replaced by a sleek little reading chair, modern, minimal, Something they must have picked out online, the kind that comes with child-safe foam and removable covers. The kind that doesn't creak when it rocks. The kind that forgets. I brushed a hand over the old wood. The chair had been in my family for generations. My mother used it to rock me. I used it for my son night after night, singing lullabies into the dark. And then again for his daughter, the same rhythm, the same comfort. Until it wasn't needed anymore. I pulled the tarp back gently, fingers trembling. For a moment I considered dragging it back inside, placing it right in the middle of the nursery where it belonged. But I knew what they would say. We're trying to make space. It's just too big for the room now. She doesn't need to be rocked anymore. I stood there heart aching in that quiet, musty garage and realized something I hadn't been ready to admit. It wasn't just the chair they'd put away. It was me. That chair was an extension of everything I had been, the middle-of-the-night comfort, the arms that never asked for thanks, the soft voice that calmed storms and nightmares and fevers, and now all of that was being made obsolete. One item at a time, one task at a time, one silence at a time. I didn't cry, not then. I just placed the tarp back over the chair with as much dignity as I could manage, smoothed it out with my palms, told myself it wasn't personal. But it was. That evening I watched her from across the room as she curled into her new chair, holding a tablet and tapping through some bright, noisy game. Her parents sat nearby chatting about work dinner plans, daycare. She didn't look up at me, not once. So I quietly left the room. I went into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, sat at the little breakfast table, the one where I used to feed her pieces of banana and sing her silly songs, the one where she used to reach across and grab my hand just because she wanted to feel close. Now my hand sat still beside the mug, waiting. Later my son came in. He looked tired. He opened the fridge, poured himself some juice, leaned against the counter, like it was all just another Tuesday. "Did you move the rocking chair?" I asked, careful to keep my voice light. He glanced at me. "Oh, yeah. We needed more space for the bookshelf. Sorry, I meant to tell you." I nodded. "It's all right." "Thought it was getting a little old anyway," he added with a shrug that didn't mean harm, but still stung like one. "I suppose it is," I murmured. "Been around a long time." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, guess things change, huh?" "Yes, they do." The next morning I went out to the garage again, just to see it one more time, to remind myself it had been real, that I hadn't imagined all the nights spent humming and rocking and holding love in my arms. And then slowly I sat down in it. The wood creaked beneath me, familiar and forgiving. I closed my eyes, let the memories flood in, not just of her, but of all of them. My son when he was small and scared of thunderstorms, my husband when he stood in the doorway watching me rock our baby, his eyes soft with awe. My mother placing her hand gently on my shoulder the first time I cried with exhaustion in that very chair. The chair held all of it, all of us. It had never just been furniture. It was a witness, a keeper of stories no one else had time to hear. I rocked slowly back and forth, the dust not bothering me now, and in that stillness, in that silence, I felt something return, a quiet strength, a whisper of who I still was beneath the dismissals and the side glances. Not useless, not a burden, just waiting to be seen again. And whether they noticed or not, I would carry that truth with me, because no one could put away the parts of me that still knew how to love. I found the little dress folded neatly in the closet, still with the tag on, soft cotton, pale yellow with white lace around the collar, tiny embroidered flowers dancing along the hem, delicate, sweet, timeless. I had bought it months ago after seeing her point at a picture of a ballerina and spin in the living room arms, out eyes closed. She loved to twirl, always had. She'd spin in her pajamas in her diaper and nothing at all if we let her. So when I saw that dress, I didn't even think twice. It felt like her. I wrapped it in tissue paper, wrote a little note. For when you want to twirl, I had scribbled in my old slanted handwriting and tucked it beneath the bodice like a secret between us. I gave it to her mother with a quiet smile. She smiled back, one of those polite, non-committal ones, and said, "Oh, that's sweet of you." She tucked it aside quickly, too quickly. I told myself it was just the rush of the morning, the clutter of a house full of motion. But deep down, I knew. Weeks passed. I never saw the dress again. Then one evening I was putting away laundry in the guest room when I opened the wrong drawer by accident. And there it was, still folded, still pristine, untouched. Not outgrown, not worn, just quietly rejected. Later that night I brought it out, laid it across the bed, sat down beside it, and ran my fingers over the lace. There was a time when I sewed all my children's clothes myself, when they would come to me with buttons dangling zippers, stuck holes in the knees, and I would fix them with care and pride, because love to me had always been in the small things, in fabric, in stitches, in the things I chose to make instead of buy. That dress had been a gesture, a memory, a part of me saying I still know her. But apparently I didn't. Or maybe more truthfully, I wasn't allowed to. The next morning, I asked gently if she'd outgrown it. Her mother looked confused for a moment, then remembered. Oh, that one. Yeah, she didn't really like the lace. Said it was itchy. I nodded slowly. Of course. But thank you, she added, and her voice sounded final, closed. After they left for daycare, I stood in the hallway staring at the empty hooks by the front door. One of them used to hold her tiny jacket. I'd help her into it each morning, pull the zipper up slowly so I wouldn't catch her chin, kiss the top of her head, and whisper something silly to make her giggle. Now she puts it on herself. Sometimes she struggles, but no one asks me for help. I just watch, always watching now. Always behind glass like a guest in a museum where I used to be the exhibit. That afternoon, I walked down to the corner shop and bought a bouquet of daffodils. I don't know why. I just needed something to hold, something bright, something that didn't make me feel like an extra in my own life. The woman at the counter smiled. For someone special. Yes, I said softly, for someone I used to twirl with. She laughed, not understanding. That was all right. I didn't need her to. When I got home, I placed the daffodils in a chipped porcelain vase in the kitchen. The light hit them just right. They looked like tiny suns blooming defiantly. Later, my granddaughter came home. She ran in arms, flailing like birds in flight, her shoes half off, one sock twisted. She stopped when she saw the flowers. "Pretty," she said. I smiled. "Do you like them?" She nodded. Then with sudden excitement, "I want to twirl." I blinked. "Now." She giggled. "Now?" So we did. Right there in the kitchen, daffodils between us, soup bubbling on the stove, her shoeless feet slipping across the tile. I held out my hands and she spun. Arms out, head thrown back, laughing until she collapsed into me, dizzy and delighted. And in that moment, the dress didn't matter. The drawer didn't matter. The quiet rejection, the folded fabric, the tag that would never be removed, none of it mattered. She was still mine in that second, not because she wore what I gave her, but because she remembered how it felt to dance with me. They hired a babysitter the week after the twirl. I found out the same way I found out about most things lately, by accident. I was coming down the stairs with a basket of folded towels when I heard a voice I didn't recognize. Young, bright, cheerful in that way people are when they're still trying to make a good impression. "Do you like puzzles?" the girl was asking. My granddaughter responded with a shy yes, her little voice trailing off into a giggle. I paused on the last step, heart already sinking before my mind caught up. The sitter was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the rug, my granddaughter curled beside her. They were opening a puzzle box I had packed away weeks ago. I stood quietly unnoticed for a moment longer than I should have, watching, listening. Her parents appeared a moment later, dressed for an evening out. My son had on that navy jacket he saves for dinners, his wife fixing an earring with one hand, phone in the other. I cleared my throat gently. They turned surprised. "Oh, we thought you'd be resting," she said quickly. "You've been so generous with your time." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You didn't need me tonight." There was an awkward pause. Then my son stepped forward. "We just thought it might be nice to give you a break. You've done more than enough." More than enough. The words landed like a door gently closing. I nodded. Of course, that makes sense. And then they were gone. I watched from the hallway as the sitter, bright-eyed, chirping, enthusiastic, asked my granddaughter what her favorite animal was. She answered instantly, "Elephant." I'd bought her an elephant blanket the week she was born, hand-sewn soft gray with little flappy ears. She used to drag it everywhere. I wondered if the sitter even knew. I returned to my room, closed the door softly behind me, sat on the edge of the bed, and folded the last towel. My hands moved automatically. I'd folded thousands over the years, for my children, their children, folded through heartbreak, folded through hope, always with care, as if every crease could somehow hold something together. But nothing felt together now. They didn't want to hurt me, I could see that. This wasn't malice. It was something quieter, something colder, redefining me. From caregiver to guest. From participant to placeholder. From necessary to optional. And optional things I've learned are the first to be set aside. That night the house was quiet. No crying, no footsteps, no calls down the hall for Grandma. Can you just silence smooth and blank? I stood by the window and looked out at the street. It shimmered faintly in the glow of the porch light. I could almost hear the echoes of years past trick-or-treaters' late-night walks with a fussy baby bundled in blankets. My son standing in the driveway asking if I wanted to ride along for errands. No echoes now, just the soft hum of a household running without me. The next morning, no one mentioned the sitter. No thank you. No how was your night, just toast. On plates, juice in cups, screens lighting faces. My granddaughter toddled in, rubbing her eyes, her curls messy and perfect. She looked at me, smiled sleepily, and reached up to be held. I hesitated, but then I lifted her, because I always would. Her head dropped to my shoulder, warm and familiar. Her breath still smelled like dreams. I rocked her gently the way I had 100 times, maybe 1,000. And then I heard her mother's voice from the kitchen. "Don't let her fall asleep on you again. She needs to nap in her bed." I froze, just slightly, not enough to wake the child, but enough to feel something inside me twist. "I know," I said softly and began to rise. I carried her back to her room, laid her down, brushed the hair from her face, and closed the door behind me with care. I didn't go back downstairs. Instead, I sat in my room and wrote a letter, not one I would send, just a letter to the version of myself who had spent decades showing up. I told her she had done enough, more than enough, that it was okay to rest, that the love she gave didn't vanish even if the world stopped asking for it out loud, that her hands, her heart, her presence, They had mattered even if no one said it this week. Even if no one says it next week either. Because she was there. And love like hers doesn't disappear. It leaves fingerprints in places no one can dust away. She called me by my first name. It was so casual, so quick I almost didn't catch it. I was in the kitchen wiping crumbs off the counter when I heard her from the living room. She was showing the sitter a picture she had drawn, bright colors and circles and lines. Only she understood. Look what I made my name. I froze. The cloth in my hand stilled mid-wipe. I turned slowly, unsure I'd heard it right, but the sitter responded with a cheery, "That's beautiful." And the moment moved on like it hadn't shattered something soft and vital inside me. She had never called me anything but Grandma. Even as her speech developed, even through toddler mispronunciations and babbled nonsense, Grandma was clear, sweet, sticky with affection. It was who I was in her world. But now I was just another name. I stepped into the room trying to smile. "Sweetheart," I said gently, kneeling beside her. "Did you mean me?" She looked up at me, wide-eyed and innocent. Yes, she chirped, and then went back to coloring. No guilt, no awareness. Children never know when they break your heart. Her mother walked by, overhearing, and said with a laugh, "She's been experimenting with names lately. Don't take it personally." But I did. Because names matter. Because that name, Grandma, was the last role I had in this house. The last title I held with any weight. Mother had been relinquished long ago. Wife was a word that echoed in a different chapter. Friend came and went. But Grandma, that was sacred. That was mine. And it was slipping through my fingers like sand. That afternoon, I sat alone in the garden surrounded by overgrown lavender and the brittle remnants of last summer's blooms. I sipped lukewarm tea and listened to the birds arguing in the hedges, their chatter as constant and chaotic as the thoughts in my head. I wondered, had I done something to cause it? Was I too much again? Too soft? Too eager? Too present in a world that seems to value absence? I had tried to adjust. I had stepped back. I had held my tongue. But in doing so, had I become invisible? Later that day, she ran to me, arms open. I scooped her up instinctively. "Do you know who I am?" I asked, not teasing but tender. She giggled. "You're my name, silly." I paused. "I used to be Grandma." "You're both," she said brightly, as if it were obvious. Then she reached up and patted my cheek the way I used to do when she was sick. "But I like your other name, too." I held her tight heart aching with the complexity of it all. She didn't mean to erase me. She didn't understand that titles are often all older women have left in a world that forgets them. I was still her warmth, still her softness, still her arms. But to everyone else I was being reclassified, not in malice, just in subtle shifts that pulled me away from center. That evening, as I passed her room, I heard her talking to her stuffed animals. "My name says it's time to brush teeth. Not Grandma. Not anymore." And something inside me began to fold inwards, quietly, without ceremony. I went back to my room, closed the door, and stared at my reflection. The lines, the folds, the silver strands, each a history of mothering, of holding, of healing. I touched my face like I was trying to remember who I used to be, before they started calling me too much, before I was repackaged as background noise. I thought about correcting her, about sitting her down and saying, "Sweetheart, I'd like you to call me Grandma again." But I didn't. Because that kind of request comes with weight, with expectation, with the potential to sound like guilt. And I never wanted to be remembered through guilt. I wanted to be remembered the way a scent lingers in a room, quiet, familiar, irreplaceable. So I let her call me by my name. But that night, as I folded laundry, I whispered to myself over and over, "I am Grandma. I am." Grandma. I am Grandma. Because saying it was the only way I still felt it. It was a rainy afternoon when I said I was sorry. We were sitting around the kitchen table, me, her mother, and my son, trying to plan the week ahead. Daycare drop-offs, grocery lists, meetings, meal prep. I offered to pick up groceries, just a small thing, something to contribute. I even smiled as I said it, trying not to sound too eager. Her mother glanced up from her planner. That's kind, but we've got it covered. I nodded. All right. I just thought. She cut me off gently. We're trying to simplify things. Sometimes too many hands makes it harder, you know. I nodded again, slower this time. I understand. And then the words came out quiet and instinctive, as if they had been stitched into me long ago. I'm sorry. They both paused. Her mother blinked. My son looked up from his phone. What for? He asked. I smiled, but it trembled, for being too much, for stepping in too often, for interfering. There was a silence after that, not cruel, not heavy, just awkward, like they hadn't expected the truth to come wrapped in apology. Oh no, his wife said, we know you meant well. And that was it. Not, you weren't interfering. Not, we're grateful. Just acknowledgement of my intention, not the value of it. I swallowed hard and changed the subject. But that night I replayed the moment 100 times. Why did I apologize? Why do women like me always apologize for being present, for caring too deeply, for giving too freely, for stepping in when no one else does? I used to be proud of my hands, how quickly they moved when someone was sick, how gently they tucked in blankets or braided hair. Now those same hands are always folded in my lap, waiting to be asked, waiting not to offend. I sat by the window as the rain slicked the glass and wondered when I started shrinking in my own skin. The truth is, I hadn't interfered. I'd just been there. I'd just loved loudly in a house that had grown quieter over time. And somewhere along the way, that love started sounding like noise to the people who used to need it. I remembered something from years ago, my mother, old and tired, trying to help me cook dinner. She'd added too much salt to the soup. I had snapped at her. Mom, just let me do it. She had stepped back, hurt, flickering in her eyes, and said I only wanted to feel useful. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Being useful isn't about needing to be praised. It's about belonging, having a place, a function, a rhythm in the lives we helped build. When that is taken away, we don't disappear, we ache. That evening, my granddaughter came into my room holding a crayon drawing. I made this, she said, smiling. It's you and me. I looked at it, 2 stick figures, both with silver hair, standing under a big sun. You drew me, I asked, my throat already thick. Yes, she said. You're the one with the tea. I laughed softly. Of course I am. And then I noticed something. At the bottom, scribbled in shaky letters, she had written me and Grandma. Not my name. Grandma. She still knew. She still remembered. Not always. Not consistently. But in her world, in the language of her drawings and dreams, I still had a name that meant something. I hugged her tightly, pressed the picture against my heart, and I whispered something I didn't expect to say again. Thank you. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, I stood in the hallway where our family photos lined the wall. Weddings, vacations, holidays. I wasn't in many of them. Sometimes behind the camera, sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes not asked at all. But I touched each frame slowly, because I had been there, every moment, every milestone. Maybe not always captured, but always felt. And I decided that night I wouldn't apologize again. Not for caring, not for showing up. Not for loving in ways too quiet for schedules and planners and rules. I would love how I always have silently, steadily, completely, whether they noticed or not. I started showing up less. Not out of spite, not with bitterness, but with something quieter dignity perhaps, or exhaustion, or the simple realization that sometimes the kindest way to love people is from a little farther away. It began with small things. I stopped hovering in the hallway during bath time, stopped offering suggestions during dinner, stopped folding laundry that wasn't mine. I let the routines go on without my presence, even when I had built so many of them from the ground up. I could feel them notice at first. A glance, a pause. My daughter-in-law would say things like, "Oh, I didn't see you come down," or, "We were going to ask if you wanted to join, but figured you might be resting." Resting. I smiled each time, but inside I knew what it really meant. My absence had become easier than my presence, and slowly they were adjusting to the space I left behind. I still helped when asked, still answered when called. But I stopped offering before anyone needed me. I stopped anticipating. I stopped trying to prove my usefulness like a child offering drawings to be pinned to a fridge that no one looks at anymore. At first the silence felt like suffocation. I would sit in my room, listening to life carry on without me. Laughter, from the living room bedtime songs sung off-key, my granddaughter's feet padding down the hallway without stopping by my door. But then somewhere in that silence I found something unexpected. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from being celebrated or included, but the kind that comes from letting go, from accepting that I cannot shape every moment, that I am not the center of this house, this family, this story, and maybe I'm not meant to be anymore. I began taking walks, short ones around the neighborhood. I'd leave quietly after breakfast while they were still bustling around getting ready for the day. I'd pass the same trees, the same houses, nod to the same man walking his old golden retriever. No one asked where I went. No one waited at the window. And that too became okay. One afternoon I sat on a park bench near the elementary school. The sound of children's laughter rose like birdsong over the fence. I watched them chase each other, shouting names, inventing rules, dissolving into giggles. None of them were mine, but they reminded me of what once was. A younger version of me would have wanted to be in the middle of it all, bringing snacks, wiping faces, keeping everyone safe. Now I just watched, and it was enough. When I returned home, no one had noticed I'd left. I stepped into the kitchen, boiled water for tea, and opened my book. The house was quiet. My granddaughter was napping. Her parents were on a call. Everything was in motion without me steering. I read for 2 hours uninterrupted. And that evening when she woke up, she found me in the garden. "Grandma," she said, her voice still soft with sleep. I looked up. "Yes, love." She walked to me holding something behind her back. "A flower," she said, revealing a crumpled dandelion already wilting at the edges, "for you." I took it like it was gold. "Thank you." She sat beside me, swinging her legs. "Where were you?" "Just out for a walk," I said. "Did you think about me?" I smiled, always. She nodded, satisfied, then leaned her head against my arm. We sat like that for a long time. No need for plans, no need for rules, just presence. And I realized then maybe I didn't need to be central anymore. Maybe being quiet didn't mean being forgotten. Maybe there was power in stepping back without disappearing. I could still love her. I could still be hers. But I didn't need to cling to the role of rescuer, organizer, fixer. That version of me had earned her rest. So I breathed in the warm air, let the dandelion wilt gently between my fingers, and told myself this is enough. You are enough. Even here. Even now. Especially now. The last time I held her overnight, she was teething and inconsolable. Her parents were exhausted, red-eyed, frayed at the seams, and I offered gently to take her for the night so they could rest. They hesitated. I saw it in their eyes, the silent weighing of my methods, my outdated lullabies, my tendency to hum when I shouldn't. But they said yes. And so I carried her to my room, wrapped her in the same knit blanket I'd made before she was born. I held her against my chest, felt the heat of her cheeks against my skin, and walked slow laps around the room, whispering nothing in particular, just sounds, just love. She finally fell asleep somewhere around 3 a.m, her small body heavy with trust, her mouth parted in perfect surrender. I laid her on the bed beside me and didn't sleep a second after that. I just watched her, memorized her face, the tiny rise and fall of her chest, the way her hand flinched in her dreams. I don't know why I knew it was the last time. There was no announcement, no rule, just a feeling, a quiet knowing. After that, the sitter came more often. Then daycare was full-time. Then she started sleeping through the night. The need for me lessened like a sunset slipping behind the hills, beautiful, gentle, and impossible to stop. They never said I couldn't keep her overnight again, but the questions stopped coming. And I for once didn't offer. The book I had once read to her every evening sits untouched on my nightstand. Its cover is fraying. One of the pages is torn from when she clumsily tried to turn it herself. I leave it there. A relic, a witness. Sometimes when I pass her room and hear her laughter from the other side of the door, I pause, not out of longing, but something else, something more still, like reverence. She's growing, she's happy, she's safe, and I helped build that, even if they don't remember it the way I do, even if they never say it aloud. One afternoon, she came to find me in the garden, clutching a piece of paper folded like a treasure. "I drew us," she said proudly, handing it over. "You're the one with the gray hair. And we're on the moon." I opened it carefully. There we were, 2 figures in spacesuits holding hands under a crooked, smiling moon. "We're on an adventure," she explained. "You brought the snacks." I laughed, surprised by how quickly the tears came. That sounds just like me. And it did. That night, after everyone was asleep, I slipped the drawing into the drawer beside my bed, next to the baby monitor that hadn't crackled in months, next to the note I wrote myself on the night I apologized for caring too much. I don't apologize anymore. I don't chase moments the way I used to. I let them come to me now, like butterflies, like sleep, like forgiveness. Because real love doesn't demand to be seen. It just stays. Even when the rocking chair is gone. Even when the door doesn't open. Even when your name changes. Even when the help is no longer needed. It stays. And I stay, not hovering, not fixing, just quietly, softly, lovingly, here.